My name is Marlene and I am 32 years old. I am standing outside my family home on Christmas Eve, holding a wrapped package that contains something that will change everything forever. Through the frosted windows, I can see the warm glow of lights, hear the sound of laughter echoing from inside. But here I am in the bitter December cold. This package in my hands is not filled with the usual holiday cheer or thoughtful gifts. Instead, it holds truths that have been buried for far too long, secrets that my so-called family thought would never see the light of day. My heart is pounding as I prepare to ring that doorbell, knowing that once I step inside, nothing will ever be the same again. Before we dive into what happened that night, I would love to know where you are watching from. Please hit that like button if you are ready to hear a story about standing up for yourself, and do not forget to subscribe because what I am about to share will absolutely blow your mind. Trust me, you will want to see how this Christmas dinner ends. To understand why I was standing in the cold that night, you need to know about my complicated relationship with the people I once called family. After my biological father passed away 3 years ago, I was left navigating a world dominated by my stepmother, Beverly, who is 58, my half-sister, Patricia, who is 29, and my half-brother, Kenneth, who is 26. When Dad married Beverly 15 years ago, I thought I was gaining a real family. I was so wrong. Beverly came from money, old Southern wealth that she never let anyone forget. She had this way of making everything about status and appearances. The house we lived in was her family estate, a sprawling colonial mansion with perfectly manicured gardens and rooms that looked like they belonged in a magazine. But beneath all that polished perfection was a coldness that I felt every single day. The subtle exclusion started almost immediately after Dad died. During Christmas mornings, Patricia and Kenneth would receive expensive jewelry, latest model electronics, and designer clothes, while I got practical items like kitchen appliances or discount store gift cards. Beverly would always smile sweetly and say something like, "I thought you could use something sensible, dear." At family gatherings, photographs were constantly being taken, but somehow I was always asked to step aside to take the pictures or told I was not needed for this particular shot. The family business meetings were perhaps the most painful exclusion. Dad had built a successful construction company from nothing, and after his death, Beverly inherited everything. Kenneth was being groomed to take over operations, Patricia was handling marketing and client relations, but I was never invited to these weekly family meetings. When I asked Beverly about it, she would pat my hand condescendingly and say, "Oh, honey, this is really more of a family affair." The tension reached a boiling point this past year when Patricia announced her engagement to Marcus Wellington, the son of the town's most prominent banking family. Suddenly, everything became about this perfect wedding, this perfect union of two powerful families. The engagement party was held at the country club, a lavish affair with hundreds of guests. I helped with the planning, spent weeks addressing invitations and coordinating with vendors, but when the actual party happened, I was seated at a table in the back corner with distant cousins I had never met. The wedding planning discussions happened every Sunday after church, elaborate sessions around Beverly's dining room table with wedding planners, florists, and caterers. I would hear them laughing and making decisions from my bedroom upstairs, never once being asked for my opinion or input. When I finally worked up the courage to ask Patricia if I could help with anything, she looked genuinely surprised and said, "Oh, we have got everything handled, but thank you." The real breaking point came during Thanksgiving dinner. The extended family was there, aunts, uncles, cousins, and family friends, all gathered around Beverly's enormous mahogany table. The conversation turned to family traditions and legacy, and Beverly launched into this speech about how important it was to preserve family values and maintain the integrity of family bonds. She kept emphasizing the word family in a way that felt deliberate and cutting. When I tried to share a memory about Dad and our old Christmas traditions, Beverly interrupted me with a tight smile. "Well, Marlene, dear, I think we all understand that some people just have different perspectives on what family really means. Not everyone can truly understand the deep connections that come from sharing the same blood and the same values." The room went silent. Kenneth looked uncomfortable and stared at his plate while Patricia nodded in agreement with her mother. I felt my face burning with embarrassment and anger, but I managed to keep my composure for the rest of the evening. That night, I went home to my small apartment across town, feeling more alone than I had since Dad died. So when the Christmas dinner invitation arrived in early December, I felt a spark of hope. Maybe Thanksgiving had been a wake-up call. Maybe Beverly realized how cruel she had been. The invitation was on thick, cream-colored cardstock, with elegant gold lettering addressed to me in Beverly's perfect cursive handwriting. It felt like an olive branch, a chance for reconciliation and healing. I actually cried when I opened it, thinking that maybe finally I would have the family Christmas I had been longing for. Oh. The phone call that changed everything came on December 20th, just 5 days before Christmas. I was at work finishing up a marketing presentation for a major client when my phone rang. Beverly's name appeared on the screen, and I answered with genuine excitement, thinking she might be calling to discuss what I could bring to dinner or to share some holiday plans. "Hello, Marlene?" Beverly's voice was crisp and businesslike, lacking any warmth or holiday cheer. "I am calling about Christmas dinner." "Oh, I am so glad you called," I said, setting down my pen and focusing entirely on the conversation. "I was wondering what I could contribute. I make a mean sweet potato casserole, or I could handle dessert if you prefer." There was a pause that lasted just a beat too long. "Actually, dear, that is why I am calling. We have decided to make this year's dinner family only, and I think it would be best if you made other arrangements." The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually felt my breath catch in my throat. "I am sorry. What do you mean by family only? I am family." Beverly's laugh was cold and sharp. "Well, technically yes, but you know how these things go. Patricia's engagement has brought so many changes, and Marcus's parents will be joining us. We want to make sure everyone feels comfortable, and frankly, your presence tends to create a certain tension. You have always been somewhat of an outsider looking in, haven't you?" I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles turning white. Beverly Dad always included me in everything. I do not understand why his death should change that. "Your father is gone, Marlene," she said, her voice becoming even colder. "And the reality is that you simply do not fit our family image. You never really have. Patricia is marrying into one of the most respected families in town, and Kenneth is taking over the business. This is about maintaining appearances and protecting what we have built. I am sure you understand." "I understand perfectly," I said, though my voice was shaking. "You are telling me that I am not good enough for your table." "I am telling you that sometimes people need to accept their place in the world," Beverly replied. "You have always made everyone uncomfortable with your intensity. This year, we just want peace and harmony. I am sure you can find somewhere else to spend Christmas." The line went dead. I sat there in my office cubicle staring at my phone, feeling like I had lost my father all over again. The other employees had already left for their holiday break, and the building was quiet except for the humming of the fluorescent lights. I put my head down on my desk and cried harder than I had since Dad's funeral. That weekend, I decided to clean out the last of Dad's belongings from his old home office, a small room in the basement that Beverly had been pressuring me to clear out for months. She wanted to convert it into a wine cellar. She said something more fitting for entertaining Marcus's family. I had been putting off this task because it felt like erasing the last traces of Dad from the house where I grew up. The office was exactly as he had left it. His reading glasses were still on the desk, next to a half-finished crossword puzzle. His coffee mug, stained and chipped from years of use, sat next to his old computer. The walls were covered with photos of construction projects, awards from the local business association, and pictures of me throughout the years. It was the only room in that house where I still felt his presence. I started with the filing cabinets, sorting through years of business documents, tax records, and personal correspondence. Most of it was routine paperwork, but then I found something that made my heart stop. Hidden behind some old insurance policies was a manila folder marked "Personal Confidential" in Dad's handwriting. Inside that folder was a world of secrets that Beverly thought would never see the light of day. The first thing I found was a series of bank statements for the Family Charity Foundation, an organization that Beverly chaired, and that was supposed to provide college scholarships for underprivileged kids in our community. The statements showed regular withdrawals of thousands of dollars, but instead of going to scholarship recipients, the money was being transferred into Beverly's personal accounts. She had been stealing from children's education funds for over 2 years. Then I found the letters. Love letters written on expensive, stationery, passionate, and intimate correspondence between Beverly and Harold Morrison, Dad's former business partner and best friend. The dates on these letters made my stomach turn. They started 6 months before Dad died, while he was battling the cancer that would eventually take his life. Beverly had been having an affair while Dad was fighting for his life, planning her future with another man while pretending to be the devoted wife. But the discoveries did not stop there. I found credit card statements that showed Kenneth had racked up over $50,000 in gambling debts at various casinos throughout the state. The bills were being paid directly from the estate fund's money that should have been part of my inheritance. Beverly was covering up her son's addiction and financial irresponsibility with money that legally belonged to all of us. The final revelation came in a folder marked with Patricia's name. Inside were credit card statements and bank records showing that she had been systematically stealing from Marcus's accounts. She had somehow gained access to his credit cards and was making purchases that she was then returning for cash or selling items and keeping the money. My perfect half-sister, who was about to marry into one of the town's most respected families, was nothing more than a common thief. I sat in that basement office until 3 a.m, reading through document after document, my hands shaking as the full scope of my family's deception became clear. They had not just excluded me from their lives. They had built their perfect image on a foundation of lies, theft, and betrayal. And all the while they had treated me like I was the problem, like I was the one who did not belong. For the next 4 days, I lived in a state of internal warfare. Part of me wanted to confront Beverly privately, to give her a chance to come clean and make things right. Maybe we could work through this as a family, I thought. Maybe there were explanations for everything I had found. But every time I reached for my phone to call her, I remembered her cold, dismissive voice telling me I did not fit their family image. I spent hours researching the legal implications of what I had discovered. The charity embezzlement alone was a federal crime that could result in serious jail time. The affair itself was not illegal, but it raised questions about Dad's will and whether Beverly had used undue influence during his final months. Kenneth's gambling debts being paid with estate funds was a clear violation of probate law, and Patricia's theft from Marcus could result in felony charges. I made copies of everything, organized the documents by family member, and created a comprehensive timeline of their deceptions. I told myself I was just being thorough, just making sure I understood the full scope of what was happening. But deep down, I knew I was preparing for war. The decision crystallized on December 23rd. I was grocery shopping, trying to figure out how to spend Christmas alone when I ran into Martha Coleman, one of Beverly's longtime neighbors and bridge partners. Martha had always been kind to me, and she approached with a warm smile and holiday greetings. "Oh, Marlene, dear, I am so excited about tomorrow's dinner," she said, adjusting her shopping cart to make room in the aisle. "Beverly has been telling everyone how wonderful it will be to have just the immediate family together. She said she was so relieved not to have any, how did she put it, any complications this year. She mentioned that some people just have a way of dragging down the family dynamic, and she was grateful to finally have a peaceful holiday." Martha kept talking, but I stopped listening. Beverly was not content to just exclude me. She was actively bad-mouthing me to her friends, painting me as some kind of troublemaker who ruined family gatherings. She was rewriting history to make herself look like the victim and me look like the villain. That night, I made my decision. If Beverly wanted to play the game of secrets and lies, I would play it better than she ever could. I spent the entire night creating individual packages for each family member. For Beverly, I compiled all the evidence of her charity embezzlement and her affair with Harold Morrison. For Kenneth, I gathered documentation of his gambling addiction and the estate funds being used to cover his debts. For Patricia, I organized proof of her theft from Marcus's accounts. Each package was wrapped in elegant Christmas paper, the kind Beverly would approve of, with beautiful silk ribbons and handwritten gift tags. To anyone looking, they would appear to be thoughtful, expensive presents. But inside each box was the truth they had all been hiding, documented and undeniable. I also wrote individual letters to accompany each package, explaining exactly what I knew and how I had discovered it. I was not angry or vindictive in these letters. Instead, I was factual and direct, laying out the evidence with the same precision I used in my marketing presentations at work. I wanted them to understand that this was not an emotional outburst. It was a calculated response to years of exclusion and disrespect. As Christmas Eve morning dawned, I looked at myself in the mirror and saw someone I barely recognized. I was no longer the desperate, excluded family member begging for acceptance. I was a woman who had discovered her own power, who had decided that the truth was more important than keeping the peace. I put on my best dress, did my makeup with extra care, and loaded the packages into my car. The drive to Beverly's house took 20 minutes, during which I thought about Dad and what he would have wanted. He had always taught me to stand up for myself, to never let anyone make me feel less than I was worth. He would have been horrified by what his wife and children had become, and I knew he would have supported what I was about to do. I sat in my car outside the house for a few minutes, watching the warm light spilling from the windows, listening to the sounds of holiday celebration coming from inside. This was my last chance to turn around to walk away and let them continue living their lies. But I had spent 3 years being the bigger person, 3 years accepting their rejection and exclusion. Tonight, they were going to face the consequences of their choices. The house looked exactly like a Christmas card as I approached the front door. Beverly had outdone herself with the decorations this year, probably trying to impress Marcus's parents. Garland wrapped around every column on the front porch, twinkling lights outlined every window, and a massive wreath hung on the front door. Even the landscaping had been enhanced with tiny lights woven through the bare winter branches of the trees. Through the tall windows flanking the front door, I could see into the dining room, where everyone was already seated around Beverly's antique mahogany table. The good china was out, the crystal glasses were sparkling under the chandelier, and everyone was dressed in their holiday finest. It looked like a scene from a wealthy family's Christmas catalog, all warmth and perfection and togetherness. I counted the people around the table as I climbed the front steps. Beverly was at the head, wearing what looked like a new emerald green silk dress. Kenneth sat to her right, in a navy blazer, his hair freshly cut and styled. Patricia was radiant in a cream-colored dress that probably cost more than I made in a month, sitting next to Marcus, who looked every inch the successful young banker in his expensive suit. But there were others, too, people whose presence would make what I was about to do even more impactful. I could see Marcus's parents, Harold and Eleanor Wellington, distinguished and elegant in their 60s. Beverly's sister Catherine was there with her husband Frank, along with their twin daughters who were home from college. Even Harold Morrison, Beverly's affair partner, was seated near the far end of the table with his wife Linda, both of them completely unaware that I knew about their dirty secret. My hands were shaking as I balanced the packages and rang the doorbell. The sound echoed through the house and I could hear conversation pause inside. Footsteps approached the door, and then Beverly's face appeared through the glass panels. Her expression went from holiday hostess smile to absolute horror in the span of a second. She opened the door slowly, her face pale despite her carefully applied makeup. "Marlene," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What are you doing here?" "Merry Christmas, Beverly," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I brought Christmas gifts for the family." I did not wait for her to respond or to invite me in. I simply walked past her into the foyer, my heels clicking on the marble floor. Beverly followed behind me, clearly flustered and trying to figure out how to handle this unexpected situation. The conversation in the dining room had completely stopped. Every face turned toward me as I entered the room, their expressions ranging from surprise to confusion to barely concealed annoyance. Kenneth's fork was halfway to his mouth, frozen in midair. Patricia's eyes narrowed as she took in my appearance and the packages in my arms. "Well, hello, everyone," I said, setting the packages down on the sideboard and taking off my coat. "I hope I am not interrupting anything important." Marcus's father cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Beverly, I thought you said this was going to be just immediate family tonight." "It was supposed to be," Beverly said tightly, moving to stand behind her chair like it was a shield. "Marlene, I think there has been some kind of misunderstanding." "Oh, there has been no misunderstanding," I replied, hanging my coat on the back of an empty chair. "I wanted to make sure I delivered these Christmas gifts personally. After all, they are very special presents chosen specifically for each member of my loving family." The word loving dripped with sarcasm that even Marcus's polite parents could not miss. Catherine looked back and forth between Beverly and me, clearly sensing the tension, but not understanding its source. Harold Morrison shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his wife Linda looking confused about why the atmosphere had suddenly become so charged. "Well," Beverly said, forcing a bright smile that did not reach her eyes, "I suppose we could set another place. Kenneth, could you get a chair from the kitchen?" "That will not be necessary," I said, moving toward the sideboard where I had placed the packages. "I will not be staying for dinner. I just wanted to deliver these gifts and share some holiday cheer." I picked up the first package, the one labeled for Beverly, in my careful handwriting. "Beverly, this one is for you." I thought long and hard about what would be the perfect gift for someone who has everything. Beverly's eyes were fixed on the package like it was a snake about to strike. "Marlene, perhaps we should do this later when we can have some privacy." "Oh no," I said, my voice growing stronger and more confident with each word. Christmas gifts are meant to be opened with family and friends. Everyone should be here to share in the joy. The room was so quiet I could hear the antique clock ticking in the corner. Even the children seemed to sense that something significant was happening. I held out the package to Beverly, who had no choice but to take it or create an even bigger scene. Her hands were trembling as she untied the silk ribbon and carefully removed the wrapping paper. She lifted the lid of the box and looked inside, and I watched all the color drain from her face. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. "Go ahead," I encouraged. "Show everyone what Santa brought you this year." Beverly's hands were shaking so badly, she almost dropped the box. Inside, neatly organized and labeled, were copies of every bank statement, every charity fund withdrawal, and every piece of evidence documenting her systematic embezzlement of scholarship money meant for underprivileged children. On top of the financial documents was a copy of one of her love letters to Harold Morrison, the passionate handwriting unmistakable even to someone seeing it for the first time. "What is this?" Marcus's mother asked, leaning forward to get a better look. Beverly clutched the box to her chest, but it was too late. Several documents had already spilled onto the table, and Harold Morrison was staring at his own name written in Beverly's familiar script. His wife Linda picked up one of the bank statements, her trained accountant's eye quickly scanning the figures. "These are Charity Foundation records," Linda said slowly, her voice growing sharper as she processed what she was seeing. "Beverly, why are there transfers from the scholarship fund into your personal accounts?" "I can explain," Beverly stammered, but her voice was barely a whisper. There were administrative costs, operational expenses that needed to be covered temporarily. $47,000 in administrative costs. Linda's voice was rising now. "Beverly, this looks like embezzlement." Harold Morrison was reading the love letter, his face turning various shades of red as he recognized his own words reflected back at him. His wife noticed his reaction and snatched the paper from his hands. The silence that followed was deafening as Linda Morrison read the intimate details of her husband's affair with the woman sitting at the head of the table. But I was not finished. I picked up the second package labeled for Kenneth in the same careful script. "Kenneth, I have not forgotten about you either." Kenneth was pressed back in his chair as if he could make himself invisible. "Marlene, please, you do not understand." "I understand perfectly," I said, placing the package in front of him. "Open it." With everyone watching, Kenneth had no choice but to unwrap his gift. Inside were casino receipts, gambling debt notifications, and bank records showing the estate fund transfers that had been covering his losses. The documentation painted a clear picture of a gambling addiction that had cost the family tens of thousands of dollars in inheritance money. Catherine gasped as she saw the casino receipts scattered across the table. "Kenneth, you told us you were working late all those nights. You were gambling." "It is not what it looks like," Kenneth said desperately, but the evidence was right there in black and white. "I had a few bad streaks, but I was going to pay it all back." Marcus's father picked up one of the bank statements, his business background making the financial impropriety immediately clear. "This money was taken from estate funds without proper authorization. This is a serious legal matter." The room was buzzing with shocked conversations, now family members and friends trying to process what they were witnessing. But I still had one more gift to deliver. I reached for Patricia's package, and my half-sister actually tried to push back from the table. "Patricia," I said sweetly, "surely you do not want to be left out of the gift-giving." "I do not want anything from you," Patricia hissed, but I placed the package in front of her anyway. "This one is extra special," I said. I think Marcus will be particularly interested in what is inside. Marcus looked between his fiancée and me, confusion and growing alarm evident on his face. Patricia, what is going on here? Patricia's hands were shaking as much as her mother's had been. She unwrapped the package slowly, as if delaying the inevitable could somehow change what was inside. When she lifted the lid, I watched her face crumble as she saw the credit card statements, the bank records, and the documentation of her systematic theft from Marcus's accounts. Marcus leaned over to look into the box, and his expression changed from confusion to disbelief to absolute fury in the span of seconds. Patricia, these are my credit cards. These are my bank accounts. What the hell is this? I can explain, Patricia whispered. But Marcus was already pulling documents out of the box, seeing charge after charge, that he had never authorized transfers, he had never approved. You have been stealing from me, he said, his voice growing louder with each word. For months, you have been stealing from me while planning our wedding, while I was planning our future together. Patricia tried to grab the documents away from him, but Marcus pulled back. It is not stealing, Marcus. We are going to be married. What is yours will be mine anyway. What is mine will be ours when we are legally married. Marcus shot back, standing up from the table. This is theft, Patricia. This is fraud. The room erupted into chaos. Multiple conversations were happening at once, voices raised in shock and anger and accusation. Linda Morrison was demanding explanations from her husband, while Beverly tried desperately to gather up the evidence that was now scattered across her perfect dinner table. Kenneth was trying to justify his gambling addiction, while Catherine and Frank looked on in horror. But I was not finished yet. I reached into my purse and pulled out one final envelope, this one addressed to the entire room. There is one more thing, I said, my voice cutting through the noise. I have one final gift for all of you. The room gradually quieted as everyone turned to look at me. I opened the envelope and pulled out a single sheet of paper, holding it up so everyone could see. This is a timeline, I said, documenting Beverly's affair with Harold Morrison. The affair that began while my father was dying of cancer, while she was pretending to be the devoted wife caring for her sick husband. Harold Morrison stood up so quickly, his chair fell backward. Marlene, you have no right to air private matters. Private matters. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Harold, you were my father's best friend. You attended his funeral. You comforted Beverly in her grief, all while knowing that you had been betraying him for months before he died. Linda Morrison was staring at her husband with an expression of pure devastation. Harold, is this true? Were you having an affair while Robert was dying? The silence stretched on until Beverly finally spoke, her voice barely audible. It was not supposed to happen. We were both grieving. We both needed comfort. My father was not dead yet, I said, my voice rising for the first time that evening. He was fighting for his life while you two were planning your future together. Did you think I would never find out? Did you think you could just erase me from the family and no one would ever discover the truth? Marcus's parents looked absolutely appalled. Eleanor Wellington had not said a word all evening, but now she stood up and addressed her son. Marcus, we need to leave. This is not the kind of family we want to be associated with. Mother, please, Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. He was still holding the evidence of Patricia's theft, looking at his fiancée like he was seeing her for the first time. Patricia finally found her voice again, and when she spoke, it was with pure venom. How dare you come here and destroy our family? How dare you ruin my engagement, my future? I did not ruin anything, I replied calmly. I simply brought the truth as my Christmas gift. Everything that is happening right now is the consequence of choices you all made. I am just the messenger." Beverly stood up, her face twisted with rage and desperation. "You vindictive, jealous little bitch! You could not stand that we were finally happy, so you decided to destroy us all." The words hung in the air like a slap. Even Kenneth looked shocked by his mother's outburst. Catherine and Frank were gathering their daughters, clearly wanting to remove them from the increasingly toxic situation. "I was never the problem," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. "I spent 3 years trying to be part of this family. 3 years accepting your rejection and exclusion. 3 years believing that somehow I was not good enough for your love and acceptance. But you know what I realized? You are the ones who are not good enough. You built your perfect life on lies and theft and betrayal, and then you had the audacity to tell me that I did not belong at your table." The aftermath was swift and brutal. Marcus stood up still, clutching the evidence of Patricia's theft, and looked around the room with disgust. "Patricia, our engagement is over. I will not marry someone who steals from me, and I certainly will not marry into a family of criminals." He pulled the engagement ring from Patricia's finger while she sobbed and pleaded with him not to leave. Marcus's parents were already gathering their coats, his father muttering something about calling their lawyer in the morning. Eleanor Wellington paused at the door and looked back at Beverly with cold contempt. "I want you to know that Harold and I will be sharing this information with the appropriate authorities," she said. "The Wellington family has a reputation to protect, and we will not be associated with fraud and embezzlement." Linda Morrison was crying openly now, 25 years of marriage crumbling before her eyes as she processed the full scope of her husband's betrayal. Harold was trying to apologize, trying to explain, but Linda was not listening. She gathered her purse and coat and walked out without another word, leaving Harold to follow behind her like a scolded child. Catherine and Frank were ushering their daughters out of the dining room, the twins wide-eyed and shocked by what they had witnessed. Catherine paused to speak to me as they passed. "Marlene, I had no idea any of this was happening," she said quietly. "Your father would have been so proud of you for standing up for yourself." Kenneth had collapsed back into his chair, his head in his hands. The gambling addiction that he had hidden for so long was now public knowledge, and the financial implications were becoming clear to everyone in the room. Frank, who worked in banking, had already started calculating the legal ramifications of using estate funds to cover gambling debts. "Kenneth, you are going to need a lawyer," Frank said bluntly. "This is not just a family matter anymore. This is fraud." Beverly was desperately trying to gather up all the documents that were scattered across her perfect table, but there were too many copies and too many witnesses. The evidence was already out there, and there was no way to contain it now. Patricia was still crying, but her tears had turned from sadness to rage. She turned on me with such fury that I actually took a step backward. "You have ruined everything, my engagement, my future, my life. I will never forgive you for this." "Your life was built on theft and lies," I replied. "If it is ruined, it is because you ruined it yourself. I just brought the truth to light." "The truth?" Beverly's voice was shrill now, all pretense of dignity abandoned. "The truth is that you are a vindictive, jealous woman who could not stand to see us happy. Your father spoiled you, made you think you were entitled to everything, and when he died, you could not accept that his real family had moved on without you." The accusation hit me like a physical blow, but I had prepared for this moment. I had known that once the truth came out, they would try to turn me into the villain. I reached into my purse and pulled out one more document, one I had saved for exactly this moment. Actually, Beverly, since we are talking about truth, there is one more thing everyone should know. I unfolded the paper and held it up. This is my father's original will, the one he wrote before he got sick, before you had the opportunity to influence him during his final months. Beverly's face went white. That will is superseded. The final will is the only one that matters legally. Maybe, I said, but this original will tells a very different story about Dad's intentions. In this version, the family business was supposed to be split equally between Kenneth and me. The house was supposed to remain in trust for all the children, not transferred entirely to you. And most interesting of all this, we'll establish a detailed oversight committee for any charitable foundations, specifically to prevent the kind of embezzlement you have been committing. I looked around the room at the faces of the remaining family members and friends. My father changed his will during the final months of his life while he was on pain medication, while he was dependent on Beverly for his daily care. I think everyone in this room can draw their own conclusions about whether those changes represented his true wishes. Kenneth looked up from his hands for the first time since his gambling addiction had been exposed. Marlene, are you saying that Mom manipulated Dad while he was sick? I am saying that your mother had an affair during Dad's illness, embezzled money from charity, covered up your gambling addiction, and enabled Patricia's theft. I am saying that she has built her entire life on deception, and that includes her relationship with our father during his final months. Beverly lunged toward me, actually trying to grab the will from my hands, but I stepped out of her reach. You have no right to question my relationship with your father. I loved him. You loved his money and his status, I replied. If you had loved him, you would not have been planning your future with Harold Morrison while Dad was fighting for his life. The room was completely silent now, except for Patricia's quiet sobbing and the ticking of the antique clock. The perfect Christmas dinner that Beverly had planned was in ruins, the elegant table covered with evidence of fraud and betrayal instead of holiday feast. I looked around the room one final time, taking in the faces of the people who had spent 3 years making me feel like I did not belong. Kenneth looked broken and ashamed. Patricia looked defeated and furious. Beverly looked like a cornered animal, dangerous and desperate. I want all of you to understand something, I said, my voice carrying clearly through the silent room. I did not come here tonight to destroy your family. I came here to reveal what your family really is. For 3 years, you made me believe that I was the problem, that I was too intense, too needy, too much of an outsider to deserve a place at your table. But the truth is that I was the only honest person in this room. I gathered my coat and purse, leaving the packages and their contents scattered across Beverly's perfect dining room table. I hope you all have a wonderful rest of your Christmas dinner. I am sure you have a lot to discuss. As I walked toward the front door, Kenneth called out behind me. Marlene, wait. We need to talk about all of this. We need to figure out what happens now. I turned back to look at him, this half-brother, who had never once defended me during 3 years of exclusion and emotional abuse. Kenneth, what happens now is that you all face the consequences of your choices. Beverly faces fraud charges for the charity embezzlement. You face legal action for the misuse of estate funds. Patricia faces the end of her engagement and probably criminal charges for theft. And I go home to my peaceful apartment and start building a real life with people who actually care about me. Beverly made one final desperate attempt to control the narrative. If you expose all of this publicly, you will destroy Dad's memory too. His business, his reputation, everything he worked for will be tainted by scandal. Dad's memory will be fine, I replied. Dad was an honest man who built his business through hard work and integrity. The scandal belongs to you, Beverly. You and your children are the ones who chose lies and theft and betrayal. Dad's legacy will survive your disgrace. I walked out into the cold Christmas Eve night, closing the door behind me on the chaos I had created. The sounds of arguing and recrimination followed me down the front walkway, but they grew fainter with each step I took toward my car. As I drove away from that house, I felt something I had not experienced in 3 years: peace. For the first time since Dad died, I was not desperately hoping for their approval or acceptance. I was not making excuses for their behavior or blaming myself for their rejection. I was simply free. The weeks following that Christmas Eve dinner were a whirlwind of consequences and revelations. Beverly tried calling me repeatedly, sometimes apologetic, sometimes threatening, always desperate to control the damage. I let every call go to voicemail and eventually changed my number entirely. Kenneth sent a series of rambling text messages about family loyalty and forgiveness, but his words rang hollow after years of complicity in my exclusion. The legal consequences came swiftly. Marcus's father, Harold Wellington, was true to his word and reported Beverly's charity embezzlement to the authorities. The investigation that followed uncovered even more financial improprieties that I had not discovered, including tax evasion and misuse of business funds. Beverly was arrested on multiple fraud charges, and the local news covered the story extensively, complete with photos of her being led away in handcuffs from the country club where she had once reigned as social royalty. Kenneth's gambling addiction became public knowledge when the estate fund misuse was investigated. He was forced to enter a court-mandated rehabilitation program and faced civil lawsuits from other family members who had been defrauded. The construction business that Dad had built from nothing was placed into receivership while the legal matters were sorted out. Patricia's situation was perhaps the most satisfying to watch unfold. Marcus not only ended their engagement, but also pressed criminal charges for the theft from his accounts. The story spread quickly through their social circle, and Patricia found herself completely ostracized from the wealthy community where she had once been a rising star. Her theft conviction meant she could not work in finance or banking, the career she had been building toward her entire adult life. But the most unexpected consequence came from other family members who reached out to me after hearing about what had happened. Cousins and aunts and uncles who had witnessed my exclusion over the years, but had remained silent, finally found their voices. They shared their own stories about Beverly's manipulative behavior, her constant criticism of me, and their discomfort with how I had been treated. My cousin Sarah Catherine's daughter called me a week after New Year's. "Marlene, I have wanted to say something for years about how Mom Beverly treated you, but I never knew how. What you did took incredible courage, and I want you to know that there are people in this family who always saw you as belonging." Those phone calls and messages meant more to me than any vindication from the legal system. For the first time in years, I felt genuinely connected to family members who saw me as a person worthy of love and respect, not as an inconvenience to be tolerated. I started therapy in January, working with a counselor who specialized in family trauma and emotional abuse. It took months of sessions before I fully understood how deeply Beverly's manipulation had affected my sense of self-worth. I had internalized her message that I was somehow less deserving of love and belonging, and it had impacted every relationship in my life. The therapy helped me recognize patterns I had been repeating in romantic relationships, always choosing men who were emotionally unavailable or critical, subconsciously seeking out the familiar dynamic of having to prove my worth. I ended a relationship with someone who had been treating me poorly for months, finally understanding that I deserved better than constant criticism and conditional affection. My work life improved dramatically as well. The confidence I had gained from standing up to Beverly translated into professional assertiveness that I had never possessed before. I asked for and received a promotion that had been long overdue, and I started speaking up in meetings instead of staying quietly in the background. I also decided to honor Dad's memory in a meaningful way. Using the life insurance money that Beverly had tried to keep me from accessing, I established a legitimate scholarship foundation in Dad's name. Unlike Beverly's corrupt charity, this foundation had proper oversight and transparent accounting. We provided full college scholarships to deserving students from working-class families, the kind of kids Dad would have wanted to help. The first scholarship recipients were announced in the fall, and seeing those young people receive opportunities for education and advancement felt like the best possible use of Dad's legacy. Beverly's stolen charity money had been recovered and was incorporated into the legitimate foundation, so in a way, her crimes had ultimately served the purpose they were supposed to serve originally. As the months passed, I found myself building new holiday traditions that had nothing to do with toxic family obligations. I spent Thanksgiving volunteering at a homeless shelter surrounded by people who were genuinely grateful for kindness and connection. I hosted Christmas dinner in my apartment for friends who had become my chosen family. People who valued honesty and authenticity over appearances and status. By the time the next Christmas arrived, I realized that I had not thought about Beverly's rejection in weeks. The exclusion that had once felt like such a devastating personal failure now seemed like a gift that had freed me from a toxic situation. I was no longer the desperate woman standing outside their door, hoping for acceptance. I was someone who had learned to value herself independent of their approval. The final lesson came when I ran into Harold Morrison at the grocery store nearly a year after that fateful Christmas Eve. He looked terrible, aged and defeated, clearly still dealing with the fallout from his affair and his role in the financial fraud. He approached me hesitantly, as if he was not sure whether I would speak to him. "Marlene," he said quietly, "I owe you an apology. What Beverly and I did to your father was unforgivable, and I am sorry you had to be the one to expose it." I looked at this man who had been like an uncle to me growing up, who had betrayed my dying father with the woman who was supposed to love and care for him. I felt no anger, no desire for revenge or further punishment. I felt only sadness for the choices that had led us all to that moment. "Harold," I said, "I forgive you not because you deserve it, but because holding on to anger was poisoning my own life. But I want you to understand that forgiveness does not mean I will ever trust you again or welcome you back into life." He nodded, tears in his eyes. "I understand. I just wanted you to know that your father would have been proud of how you handled everything. He always said you had more integrity than the rest of us combined." As I drove home that day, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to that moment of genuine peace. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give toxic people is the truth, even when it costs you the relationship. Sometimes the family that rejects you is doing you the biggest favor of your life, freeing you to find people who will love and value you exactly as you are. I had learned that belonging is not about being accepted by people who do not respect you. It is about finding your tribe among people who see your worth and celebrate your authenticity. The family that had spent years making me feel like I did not belong at their table had actually been showing me that I belonged somewhere far better. What happened that Christmas Eve changed everything for me, but not in the way I had expected when I stood on that doorstep holding my packages of truth. I had not gained their acceptance or love. I had discovered that I no longer needed or wanted it. The greatest gift I gave myself that night was the freedom to stop seeking validation from people who had already shown me exactly who they were. If you have ever felt excluded from family gatherings or made to feel like you do not belong, I want you to know that your worth is not determined by other people's ability to see it. Sometimes the people who reject us are doing us the greatest favor of our lives, pushing us toward relationships and communities where we will truly be valued and loved. Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and standing up for yourself in a family situation? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. Please hit that like button if this story resonated with you, and do not forget to subscribe for more stories about finding your strength and standing up for your truth. Share this video with anyone who needs to hear that they deserve better than conditional love and acceptance. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope your holidays are filled with people who truly see and value the amazing person you are. Remember, the best revenge against people who do not appreciate you is living a beautiful, authentic life without them.